Former President Donald Trump has secured a bond that allows him to hold on to his New York properties for now. And in another case against him, a judge has expanded the partial gag order that he put on Trump. ABC's Alexis Christophorus has the latest.
Former President Donald Trump has secured a $175 million bond in his New York civil fraud case. That means for now, his assets will not be seized by the state. A judge had found Trump and his two oldest sons deceived lenders by inflating their net worth. Last week, a court reduced the size of the bond Trump needed to cover the $464 million judgment, while his lawyers appealed the ruling. But if the appeal fails, Trump will have to secure the original amount, or authorities could begin seizing his New York properties.
We will seek, judgment enforcement mechanisms in court, and we will ask the judge to seize his assets.
Trump's lawyers had argued the former president lacked the cash to secure a bond for the full judgment after being rejected by more than 30 bond companies. Meanwhile, another judge has now expanded the gag order against Trump in the criminal case.
All right, folks, welcome to Dr. John Podcast right now. A federal judge has ruled that Donald Trump committed fraud by systematically inflating his assets to obtain better loans and insurance, and now owes over $450 million in ill-gotten gains, with interest compounding at tens of thousands of dollars per day. If Trump doesn't pay, New York's Attorney General is prepared to seize his trophy properties, including Trump Tower and Mar-a-Lago. Let me walk you through exactly what Judge Arthur Engoron did and why this is so devastating for Trump. The judge issued a judgment ordering Trump to pay back roughly $355 million in disgorgement. That's the legal term for forcing someone to give back money they obtained through wrongful conduct.
Where he's accused of falsifying business records related to a so-called hush money payment to porn actress Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 election. Trump has pleaded not guilty. The order from Judge Juan Merchan prevents Trump from attacking the judge's family members and the family of District Attorney Alvin Bragg. Trump targeted Merchan's daughter on social media for her work with a group involved in Democratic politics. During radio interviews in Wisconsin ahead of that state's primary, Trump called the cases against him unfair.
I didn't have cases in my whole life. Can you imagine? And now I get all this stuff that has happened with that. And it's purely election. It's all nonsense.
In a statement, the Trump campaign called the judge's order unconstitutional, saying it deprives him from engaging in political speech, which is protected by the First Amendment. But Judge Merchan said Trump's words have singular power and is deliberate and intended to intimidate this court. The trial is set to start April 15th.
And with interest, that number balloons to between $454 and $464 million. The judge specifically found that Trump engaged in a pattern of inflating his assets on financial statements to trick banks and insurance companies into giving him better deals. Trump lied about the value of Trump Tower. Trump lied about the value of Mar-a-Lago. Trump lied about the value of his golf courses. He systematically misrepresented his net worth to obtain financial benefits he wasn't entitled to. Now here's what's absolutely crazy about this situation. Trump doesn't have the liquid cash to pay the judgment. He had to scramble to post a $175 million bond just to temporarily prevent asset seizures while he appeals.
Donald Trump's lawyers say he's been unable to obtain a bond for the $454 million he owes as part of a civil fraud judgment against him, his eldest sons and his company. He's asking a New York State appeals court to pause the judgment against him while he appeals. Well, let's cross live now to New York and speak to our North America correspondent, Neda Tawfik, who is there for us. Neda, what exactly is this all about?
Yeah, well, Miriam, when Donald Trump was ordered to pay these massive amounts in two consecutive civil judgments, many questioned if he had the cash to do it. Now, earlier this month, he did post a $91.6 million bond in the E. Jean Carroll defamation case. But as you said there, today his lawyers have said he's been unable to obtain a bond in the much larger civil business fraud judgment against him. Now, just for the viewers to understand, a bond company basically takes on the responsibility for any payout if a defendant loses on appeal and is unable to pay.
And even that was a struggle. Trump was literally warning that he might have to sell properties at fire sale prices because he was running out of money to post the bond. Think about that for a moment. The man who built his entire public image around being a billionaire real estate mogul had to scramble to find $175 million just to keep his properties from being seized. That's the kind of financial pressure Trump is under right now. And here's the thing that makes this even more significant. This is not some theoretical financial problem. This is a judge-ordered repayment for fraud. This is the court system saying Trump committed fraud and has to pay it back. This is New York's Attorney General preparing to seize assets if Trump doesn't pay. This is real legal and financial consequences for Trump's conduct.
And according to Donald Trump's lawyers, that getting a bond has been a practical impossibility for them. They say they've reached out to 30 companies, that very few will even consider giving him a bond that large at $454 million, and that others won't accept his real estate as collateral. They'll only accept cash or stocks. So he is asking the New York State Appeals Court to pause the judgment against him while he appeals. Now, if he's not granted that pause, and if he truly doesn't have the cash to secure that bond, well then, Miriam, the Attorney General, Letitia James, could ask a judge to start seizing his assets. You know, her office has said he has until March 25th to put up the entire amount of the judgment, or she will start trying to collect.
The money keeps accruing. Interest is clocking in at tens of thousands of dollars per day. So every single day that Trump doesn't pay, the judgment gets bigger. The interest compounds, the amount he owes grows, and the threat of asset seizure gets closer. Trump's iconic properties, Trump Tower, Mar-a-Lago, his golf courses, all of them are at risk of being seized to satisfy a fraud judgment. New York's Attorney General made clear that if Trump didn't post a sufficient bond, she was ready to move on his assets. She was ready to freeze his accounts. She was ready to seize properties. And Trump had to scramble and post a $175 million bond just to temporarily block those seizures while he appeals. That's the kind of financial pressure Trump is under. That's the kind of legal jeopardy he's facing, and this is not going away. This is a judgment that stands until Trump pays it or wins on appeal. And if he loses on appeal, the asset seizures could begin immediately. The New York case isn't just about money, though. It's about accountability. It's about the rule of law. It's about the idea that no one, not even a former president, is above the law when it comes to fraud and deception. Judge Engoron's ruling makes it clear that Trump's business practices were fraudulent and that he has to face the consequences. And those consequences are severe. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties. We're talking about the potential loss of Trump's most iconic properties. We're talking about a financial and legal crisis that could fundamentally reshape Trump's business empire. Now let me connect this to the broader pattern of Trump's legal troubles. This fraud judgment is just one part of a much larger accountability picture. Trump is facing multiple criminal cases, he's facing other civil cases, he's facing investigations, and each of these cases adds to the pressure on Trump. Each case creates new legal exposure, new financial exposure, new potential consequences, and all of it is coming together at the same time, creating a perfect storm of legal and financial problems for Trump. The fraud judgment is particularly significant because it's already been decided. It's not a potential outcome. It's not a future risk. It's a current reality. A judge has already ruled that Trump committed fraud. A judge has already ordered him to pay hundreds of millions of dollars. And the enforcement mechanisms are already in motion. Trump had to post a bond to prevent asset seizure. But that bond is just a temporary measure. If Trump loses on appeal, the asset seizures will proceed. New York will move to take his properties. And Trump will have to watch as his trophy assets are seized to satisfy a fraud judgment. That's the situation Trump is in right now. A fraud judgment of hundreds of millions of dollars, the threat of asset seizure hanging over his head, property seizures looming, and Trump desperately posting a bond just to buy time while he appeals. And here's what really matters about this situation. This is not some theoretical financial problem. This is a judge-ordered repayment for fraud. This is the court system saying Trump committed fraud and has to pay it back. This is New York's Attorney General preparing to seize assets if Trump doesn't pay. This is real legal and financial consequences for Trump's conduct. Let me take you deeper into what's actually happening with this civil fraud judgment and why it represents such a serious threat to Trump's financial situation and his assets. Because this is not just about money. This is about a court finding that Trump committed fraud and ordering him to pay back the proceeds of that fraud. So let's look at the key points that explain what's going on and what comes next. A New York judge found that Trump committed fraud over years of operating his business and ordered him to pay back roughly $355 million in ill-gotten gains, which balloons to over $450 million with interest. This is not a small judgment. This is a massive financial judgment based on a finding of fraud. And Engoron specifically found that Trump engaged in a pattern of inflating his assets on financial statements to trick banks and insurance companies into giving him better deals. That's systematic fraud. That's the kind of conduct that warrants not just a fine, but complete repayment of the ill-gotten gains. Trump doesn't have the liquid cash to pay the judgment, so he had to post a bond to temporarily prevent asset seizure. And the bond itself is $175 million, still a massive amount of money. Trump had to scrape together $175 million just to buy time while he appeals. And if he loses on appeal, the full judgment becomes enforceable, and New York can seize his assets to satisfy it. So Trump is facing a situation where he's already spent $175 million on a bond, and if he loses, he's going to have to pay the full amount and potentially lose his properties. Interest is accruing on the judgment at tens of thousands of dollars per day, so the amount Trump owes is growing every single day. This is not a static judgment. This is a growing obligation. The longer Trump delays payment or delays the appeal process, the more interest accumulates and the more he owes. So Trump has an incentive to resolve this quickly. But at the same time, Trump is probably going to appeal because he's hoping to overturn the judgment. But every day of appeals, every day of legal delay, the judgment grows through interest. So here's what's really at stake. The question of whether Trump can hang on to his iconic properties or whether New York will seize them to satisfy the fraud judgment. Trump Tower, Mar-a-Lago, his golf courses, all of them are at risk. All of them could be seized by New York to satisfy the judgment if Trump loses on appeal or if Trump doesn't pay. And that's a serious threat to Trump's empire. That's a threat to the properties that Trump has spent decades building and that are central to his brand and his identity. And here's what's likely to happen next. Trump is going to appeal the judgment. Trump is going to argue that Engoron was wrong, that he didn't commit fraud, that the judgment should be overturned. But appeals take time. And while Trump is appealing, interest keeps accruing. The judgment keeps growing. And if Trump loses on appeal, he faces the prospect of having to pay the full amount or having his assets seized. So Trump is in a race against time. Trump is trying to win on appeal before he runs out of financial resources or before New York moves to seize assets. And here's what's important about the broader implications. This civil fraud judgment shows that Trump can be held accountable through the courts, even though he's president. A judge found he committed fraud. A judge ordered him to pay back ill-gotten gains. And Trump had to scramble to post a bond to prevent asset seizures. That shows the courts still have power to enforce judgments against a president. That shows a president is not above the law when it comes to civil judgments. And that's significant for the rule of law because it shows that even the president has to comply with court orders. But it's also significant because it shows Trump's financial vulnerability. Trump doesn't have unlimited resources. Trump had to post a $175 million bond to prevent asset seizure. That suggests Trump's liquid resources are not as vast as he claims. And if Trump loses on appeal and has to pay the full judgment, it could force Trump to sell assets or liquidate properties. And that could damage Trump's financial empire in significant ways. So the bottom line is this. Judge Engoron found that Trump committed fraud and ordered him to pay back roughly $355 million in ill-gotten gains, which has grown to over $450 million with interest. Trump posted a $175 million bond to temporarily prevent asset seizure while he appeals. But if Trump loses on appeal, his trophy properties could be seized to satisfy the judgment. Interest is accruing at tens of thousands of dollars per day. So the amount Trump owes is growing, and Trump is in a race to either win his appeal or find a way to pay the full judgment before New York moves to seize his assets. This is a serious financial and legal crisis for Trump. His most iconic properties are at risk. His financial resources are being drained, and the threat of asset seizure is looming. If Trump loses on appeal, the next phase of this case, enforcement and potential asset seizure, could be absolutely dramatic and could result in New York seizing Trump's properties to satisfy the fraud judgment. The implications of this judgment extend far beyond Trump's personal finances. This is about accountability. This is about the rule of law. This is about whether someone who occupies the highest office in the land can be held accountable for fraud and deception. Judge Engoron's ruling sends a powerful message that no one is above the law, and the enforcement mechanisms that New York is preparing to deploy send an equally powerful message that judgments will be enforced, even against presidents. Trump's legal team is fighting back, of course. They're appealing the judgment. They're arguing that Engoron made errors in his ruling. They're hoping that the appellate court will overturn the judgment or at least reduce the amount. But appeals are risky. There's no guarantee that the appellate court will side with Trump. And while the appeal is pending, interest continues to accrue, the judgment continues to grow, and the threat of asset seizure continues to loom. This situation creates a significant amount of uncertainty for Trump. He doesn't know if he's going to win on appeal. He doesn't know how much the judgment will ultimately cost him. He doesn't know if his properties will be seized. And that uncertainty itself is a form of pressure. It's a form of leverage that the legal system has over Trump. It's a way of holding him accountable even while the appeals process plays out. The civil fraud judgment also has implications for Trump's political future. If Trump loses on appeal and has to pay hundreds of millions of dollars, that's going to damage his brand. It's going to make him look like a fraudster, like someone who got caught cheating and had to pay the price. And that's going to be a liability for him politically. It's going to be something that his opponents can point to and say, see, Trump is a fraud. He inflated his assets. He lied to banks. He was caught and he had to pay. The judgment also has implications for Trump's ability to raise money for his political activities. If Trump has to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in penalties, that's money that won't be available for political spending. That's money that won't be available for campaign contributions or for legal defense funds. And that could be a significant problem for Trump as he tries to maintain his political influence. Now let me bring all of this together and explain why this fraud judgment is so consequential for Trump and what it means for his future. The financial pressure on Trump is enormous. The legal pressure is enormous. And the political pressure is enormous. All of it is coming together at the same time, creating a perfect storm that Trump is struggling to navigate. Judge Engoron's ruling that Trump committed fraud is a devastating blow to Trump's carefully constructed image as a successful businessman. For years, Trump has built his brand around the idea that he's a billionaire genius who knows how to make deals and build wealth. But Engoron's ruling exposes that image as a fraud. Trump didn't build his wealth through legitimate business acumen. He built it by lying about the value of his assets. He inflated his net worth to get better deals. He deceived banks and insurance companies. And now he has to pay the price. The price is steep, hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's growing every day through interest. Trump had to post a $175 million bond just to keep his properties from being seized. And even that was a struggle. Trump had to scramble to find the money. He had to get a bond from a private insurer, and the cost of that bond was significant. All of this is draining Trump's financial resources and putting enormous pressure on his business empire. But here's the thing, the civil fraud judgment is just one piece of Trump's legal troubles. He's also facing criminal cases. He's facing other civil cases. He's facing investigations. And each of these cases adds to the pressure on Trump. Each case creates new legal exposure, new financial exposure, new potential consequences, and all of it is coming together at the same time. The criminal cases are particularly significant. Trump is facing charges in multiple jurisdictions. He's been indicted in New York, in Florida, in Georgia, and in federal court. And each of those cases carries the potential for prison time. If Trump is convicted in any of those cases, he could face significant prison sentences. And that would be devastating for Trump personally and politically. The civil cases are also significant. In addition to the New York fraud judgment, Trump is facing other civil cases that could result in additional financial penalties. And those penalties could add up to hundreds of millions of dollars more. Trump is facing a mountain of legal and financial exposure that could take years to resolve. All of this raises questions about Trump's ability to continue his political career. If Trump loses on appeal in the New York fraud case, he'll have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars. That's going to be a significant drain on his resources. It's going to limit his ability to fund political activities, and it's going to damage his brand. If Trump is convicted in any of the criminal cases, he could face prison time. That would obviously be devastating for his political career. The prospect of Trump going to prison is a real possibility at this point. The criminal cases against Trump are serious. The evidence is substantial, and Trump doesn't have many defenses left. The self-pardon doesn't work. The immunity claims are too narrow. The prosecutions can proceed after the presidency. All of Trump's legal defenses are gone, and he's facing the real possibility of spending the rest of his life in federal prison. The civil fraud judgment is not the most serious legal threat Trump is facing, but it's the most immediate. It's already been decided. Trump has already been found liable, and the enforcement mechanisms are already in motion. Trump had to post a bond to prevent asset seizure, but that's just a temporary measure. If Trump loses on appeal, the asset seizures will proceed. New York will move to take his properties, and Trump will have to watch as his trophy assets are seized to satisfy a fraud judgment. The political implications of all this are significant. Trump's opponents are going to use these legal troubles against him. They're going to point to the fraud judgment and say, Trump is a fraudster. They're going to point to the criminal charges and say, Trump is a criminal. They're going to use all of this to undermine Trump's credibility and his political viability. Trump's supporters are likely to stick with him, at least for now. They've shown remarkable loyalty in the face of previous legal troubles. But even Trump's supporters have their limits. If Trump ends up in prison, that's going to be hard to spin. If Trump's properties are seized, that's going to be hard to spin. And if Trump's financial empire collapses, that's going to be hard to spin. The bottom line is this. Trump is facing a legal and financial crisis that is unprecedented for a former president. He's been found liable for fraud and ordered to pay hundreds of millions of dollars. He's facing criminal charges that could result in prison time. He's facing other civil cases that could add to his financial exposure. And all of this is happening at the same time, creating a perfect storm of legal and financial problems. Judge Engoron's ruling that Trump committed fraud is a devastating blow to Trump's image and his financial empire. The judgment is hundreds of millions of dollars and growing. Trump had to scramble to post a bond to prevent asset seizure. And if he loses on appeal, his trophy properties could be seized. This is a serious financial and legal crisis for Trump, and it's far from over. The next phase of this case, enforcement and potential asset seizure, could be absolutely dramatic. If Trump loses on appeal, New York's Attorney General is ready to move on his assets. She's ready to freeze his accounts. She's ready to seize properties. And Trump will have to watch as his trophy assets are taken to satisfy a fraud judgment. That would be a humiliating and devastating moment for Trump. It would be the ultimate rebuke of his carefully constructed image as a successful businessman. And beyond this case, Trump is facing more legal troubles. The criminal cases continue. The other civil cases continue. The investigations continue. All of it is adding to the pressure on Trump. All of it is creating new risks and new exposure. And all of it is happening while Trump is still serving as president. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a president who is facing unprecedented legal and financial pressure. A president who has been found liable for fraud. A president who is facing criminal charges. A president whose trophy properties could be seized. A president who could end up in prison. This is a president in crisis, and the crisis is only going to get worse. The fraud judgment is a significant piece of that crisis. It shows that Trump can be held accountable. It shows that the courts can enforce judgments against a president. It shows that Trump's financial empire is vulnerable. And it shows that the legal system is capable of holding even a president accountable for fraud and deception. This is the reality Trump is facing: a fraud judgment of hundreds of millions of dollars. The threat of asset seizure, criminal charges, ongoing investigations, all of it adding up to a legal and financial crisis that is unprecedented for a former president. And all of it happening in real time while Trump is still serving as president. The coming months and years will be critical for Trump. He'll either win his appeal and get the fraud judgment reduced or overturned, or he'll lose and face the full consequences of his fraudulent conduct. He'll either beat the criminal charges or face prison time. He'll either rebuild his financial empire or watch it collapse. The stakes are enormous, and the outcome is far from certain. What is certain is that Trump is facing a legal and financial crisis that is unlike anything any president has faced before. A fraud judgment of hundreds of millions of dollars, the threat of asset seizure, criminal charges, ongoing investigations, all of it happening at the same time. This is a president in crisis, and it's going to get worse before it gets better.